A bowl of cold instant noodles sat beside a stack of unpaid utility bills, the smell of old grease and printed paper mingling in the dim room. My name is Camilla. I'm 32 years old. I've spent my entire youth nurturing other people's family dreams, $50 birthday cakes, $200 Christmas gift boxes, toys for 9 grandchildren, all wrapped with my money and my silent sacrifice. I thought this Christmas would be different. Instead, standing behind the kitchen doorframe, I heard my mother's voice cut through the air like a blade. Camilla? She loves babysitting anyway. Just dump them all on her for the whole day. Then Maria, with her laugh sharp as a cleaver cutting meat, added, and this time, she'll have to pay the $2,000. They wanted me to pay $2,000. My heart felt like it was being drilled. I slammed the door shut, turned back to my desk, opened my laptop, the blue light reflecting off my tear-filled eyes, and knew I would never be silent again. When family turns love into chains to exploit you, will you choose blind loyalty or justice for yourself? Stay with me, because I tore up that Christmas card and wrote, "Never again." But let me take you back, because this betrayal didn't happen overnight. It was built, brick by brick, over 32 years of careful conditioning. Growing up in our household was like living in a theater where the roles were assigned before you could even speak. I was cast as the responsible oldest daughter, the one who would sacrifice, endure, and smile while doing it. Maria, 3 years younger, was handed the starring role of the beloved baby. Charming, fragile, deserving of protection and endless second chances. The script was written in the language of obligation disguised as love. When I was 12 and Maria was 9, and she accidentally broke our neighbor's window with a baseball, guess who had to give up 3 months of allowance to pay for it? When I was 16 and had saved enough from my part-time job at the local diner to buy my first car, guess whose emergency dental work suddenly required exactly that amount? When I was 22 and had been accepted to a graduate program in marketing with a partial scholarship, guess whose surprise pregnancy meant someone needed to stay home and help with the bills? Every single time, the answer was me, and every single time, it was wrapped in the same suffocating ribbon of family duty. Camila, you're so responsible, they'd say, as if responsibility was a genetic defect I'd been born with. Camila, you're so good with money, they'd coo, while my savings account bled out for their emergencies. Camila, you're so independent, they'd praise, while systematically ensuring I could never actually be independent enough to leave. The pattern became so normalized that I stopped seeing it as exploitation. I started seeing it as love. Twisted, suffocating, one-sided love, but love nonetheless, because that's what they told me it was. Family takes care of family, my mother would remind me whenever I showed even a flicker of resistance. Blood is thicker than water, mija. We're all we have. But what they really meant was, Camilla takes care of family. Everyone else just receives. The breaking point should have come years ago. Maybe it should have been when I had to cash out my 401k to pay for Maria's second wedding, the one to the man she'd been cheating on her first husband with. Maybe it should have been when I spent my entire vacation time for 3 consecutive years watching Maria's kids so she could take couples retreats with husband number 2. Maybe it should have been when my mother borrowed $5,000 from my emergency fund to help Maria buy a bigger house, money that was never mentioned again, let alone repaid. But the human heart has an infinite capacity for self-deception when it comes to family. I told myself that this was temporary. I told myself that once Maria got on her feet, once the kids were older, once my mother retired and had more time, then things would balance out. Then I would matter. Then my sacrifices would be acknowledged, appreciated, reciprocated. I was a fool. The truth hit me like a freight train 3 weeks before this Christmas, during what I now call the phone call that changed everything. I had been in my small apartment, the same studio I had been renting for 4 years because I could never save enough for a down payment on a house, what with all the family emergencies, when my phone rang. It was my mother, but she hadn't realized she'd actually dialed my number. I was about to hang up when I heard her talking to someone else, probably my Aunt Carmen. "Oh, Carmen, you know how it is with Camilla," my mother was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone of fond exasperation she used when discussing a slightly slow child. "She's 32 and still single, so she has nothing else to do anyway. And she makes good money at that office job, not like she has a husband or kids to spend it on." My stomach clenched, but the worst was yet to come. For Christmas this year, we figured we'd just let her handle everything. The food, the decorations, watching all the kids so the rest of us can actually enjoy ourselves. She loves feeling useful, you know? It's not like she has her own family to worry about. There it was. The truth, naked and brutal. I wasn't their daughter or their sister. I was their unpaid staff, their emergency fund, their built-in childcare service. And they genuinely believed that because I was single, because I didn't have children of my own, my time was worthless. My money was communal property. My life was just a support system for everyone else's happiness. Plus, my mother continued, and I could hear the smile in her voice, "Maria's been having such a hard time with the divorce settlement. It would be nice if Camilla could cover the catering costs this year. She owes us that much after everything we've done for her." I owed them. After 30 years of being the family ATM, the emergency babysitter, the sacrificial lamb, I owed them. I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in the black screen. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Tired eyes, premature worry lines, shoulders permanently hunched from carrying everyone else's burdens. When had I become this person? When had I agreed to disappear so completely that my own family could discuss using me like a resource without feeling even a twinge of guilt? That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and did something I should have done years ago. I calculated exactly how much I had given this family over the past decade. The list was staggering. Car repairs for Maria, $3, $200. Emergency daycare costs when she couldn't pick up the kids, $1,800. Her share of our mother's medical bills, $5,500. The deposit for her apartment after her first divorce, $2,400. Groceries during her tight months, $4,300. Christmas presents for her children every year, $2,700. Birthday parties I planned and paid for, $1,900. The vacation to Disney World, where I was invited solely to watch the kids while everyone else enjoyed themselves, $3,800. The total came to over $26,000. $26,000 of my hard-earned money, handed over with a smile and a family helps family acceptance that now felt like the greatest joke ever played. But the money was only part of it. The real cost was in time, opportunities, and dreams deferred. How many evenings had I spent babysitting instead of dating? How many weekends had I given up to help with family events instead of pursuing my own interests? How many career opportunities had I turned down because I needed to be available for the next family emergency? I had spent my 30s building everyone else's life while mine remained in permanent pause. The notebook sat open in front of me, pages full of numbers that told the story of my invisible life. And for the first time in 32 years, I felt something that scared me with its intensity. Rage. Pure, clean, righteous rage. They thought they knew me. They thought they had me figured out. Good old, reliable Camilla, the spinster sister who lives to serve. They had no idea what they had created. They had no idea that their useful daughter had been keeping very careful track of exactly how useful she'd been. And they definitely had no idea what was coming. Because 3 weeks later, on December 23rd, when I overheard them planning to stick me with a $2,000 catering bill and 12 hours of unpaid childcare while they enjoyed the Christmas party I was paying for, something inside me didn't just break. It crystallized into something harder and more dangerous than they could imagine. I was done being useful. It was time to be inconvenient. The drive to Colorado took 8 hours, but it felt like a journey through time itself. Every mile that stretched between me and that suffocating house was a mile toward a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. I had called my college friend Sarah at midnight on December 23rd, my voice shaking with a mixture of fury and desperation I'd never heard in myself before. "Sarah, I know this is crazy, but can I come spend Christmas with you and David? I can't be here anymore." Sarah, bless her heart, didn't ask questions. She just said, "Drive safe, honey. We'll be waiting." The landscape changed as I drove, from the flat, beige sprawl of my hometown to the majestic snow-capped peaks of Colorado. With each passing hour, I felt something loosening in my chest, a knot I'd been carrying for so long that I'd forgotten it wasn't a natural part of my anatomy. I arrived at Sarah's house at 2 a.m. on Christmas Eve, exhausted and hollow. But when she opened the door, no questions, no judgment, just warm arms and the smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven because she couldn't sleep either, I broke down completely. Not the polite, silent tears I'd perfected over the years, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from decades of buried grief. "I don't know who I am when I'm not taking care of them," I whispered against her shoulder. "Then maybe," she said gently, "it's time to find out." Christmas morning in the Patterson household was a revelation. Sarah and David had 2 children, ages 7 and 10, and they had invited Sarah's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who would otherwise be alone for the holidays. But here's what blew my mind. When Mrs. Chen offered to help with dinner preparation, Sarah said, "That's so sweet of you, but you're our guest. Relax and enjoy yourself." When little Emma spilled grape juice on the white tablecloth, David just laughed and said, "Well, now, it's a Christmas tablecloth with personality." When 10-year-old Jake got overwhelmed by all the excitement and had a meltdown, both parents calmly took turns comforting him without anyone being assigned blame or responsibility for managing his emotions. And when dinner time came, everyone, even the children, helped set the table, serve the food, and clean up afterward. It wasn't anyone's sole responsibility. It wasn't expected. It was just shared. I sat in their living room that evening, watching David help Emma build a Lego castle while Sarah and Jake worked on a puzzle, and Mrs. Chen dozed peacefully in the recliner, and I realized I was witnessing something I'd never seen before. A family where everyone's needs mattered equally, where care was mutual, where love wasn't measured by how much you could endure or provide, but by how much joy you could share. That's when my phone started buzzing. The first text came from my father at 6 p.m. "Where are you?" The turkey is still frozen, and nobody knows how to work the fancy oven. Then Maria at 6:30. "Seriously, Camilla, this isn't funny anymore. The kids are asking where their presents are, and I don't know what to tell them." My mother at 7. "This is very selfish, mija. Family doesn't abandon family." By 8 p.m., I had 17 missed calls and a voicemail from Maria that started with crying and ended with screaming, "You've ruined Christmas for 9 children. I hope you're happy." But here's the thing that shocked me. I was happy. Sitting in that warm, peaceful living room, surrounded by people who had invited me, not because they needed something from me, but because they enjoyed my company. I was happier than I'd been in years. Sarah found me staring at my phone, reading message after message of blame and guilt and accusations. "Want to talk about it?" she asked. So I did. I told her everything: the years of financial exploitation, the endless babysitting, the way they'd trained me to see my own needs as selfish and my boundaries as betrayal. I told her about the phone call I'd overheard, about the Christmas plan that had finally broken me. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that would change my life. "Camilla, what you're describing isn't family. It's abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, and exploitation. The fact that it's wrapped up in family obligations doesn't make it any less harmful." The word abuse hit me like a physical blow. I'd never thought of it that way. Abuse was dramatic, black eyes and broken bones and restraining orders. What I experienced was just family being family, right? "Honey," Sarah said gently, "healthy families don't keep score sheets of who owes whom. Healthy families don't assign one person to be the permanent caretaker and ATM. And healthy families sure as hell don't plan elaborate schemes to exploit someone's love and then blame them for finally saying no." That night, lying in Sarah's guest room, I did something I'd never done before. I imagined what my life could look like if I stopped playing the role they'd assigned me. What if I kept my money for myself? What if I spent my weekends doing things I enjoyed instead of providing free childcare? What if I dated without constantly being called away for family emergencies? What if I took that marketing job in Denver that I'd turned down last year because my mother had said she needed me to stay close to home? The possibilities stretched out before me like a mountain range, vast, challenging, and beautiful. But I also knew that claiming this new life wouldn't be easy. My family had 32 years of practice in manipulating me back into compliance. They'd pull out every weapon in their arsenal: guilt, obligation, fear, and their ace in the hole: the threat of abandonment. "If you don't do this, you'll have no family at all." For years, that threat had worked because I believed that a dysfunctional family was better than no family. But sitting in Sarah's house, experiencing what healthy relationships actually felt like, I realized I'd had it backward. No family was infinitely better than a family that existed solely to drain you dry. I spent the next 3 days in Colorado planning my new life with the same meticulous attention I'd once devoted to everyone else's needs. Sarah helped me research apartments in Denver. David, who worked in finance, helped me understand my credit score and savings potential when I wasn't constantly giving money away. Mrs. Chen, who turned out to be a retired therapist, helped me understand the psychological patterns that had kept me trapped for so long. "Boundaries," she explained over tea on my last morning there, "aren't walls you build to keep people out. They're gates you control to let the right people in. Your family has spent 3 decades teaching you that you don't deserve gates, but every human being deserves to control who has access to their time, money, energy, and heart." By December 28th, I had a plan. I was going to move to Denver and take that marketing job, if it was still available. I was going to get my own apartment and fill it with things I liked, not hand-me-downs from family members who were upgrading. I was going to start dating again, and when family emergencies arose, I was going to ask the question that had never occurred to me before. What are the other adults in this family doing to solve this problem? But first, I had to go home and face the reckoning. The drive back home felt different from the drive to Colorado. I wasn't fleeing anymore. I was returning with purpose. My phone had been mercifully quiet for the past day. I suspect they'd finally realized that their usual tactics weren't working and were regrouping for a new strategy. I was right. I walked into my apartment to find my mother sitting on my couch, armed with a plate of my favorite cookies and the kind of sad, martyred expression she'd perfected over the years. "Mija," she said, rising to embrace me with the careful tenderness of someone handling a fragile, unstable object. "We need to talk." For 32 years, those 4 words had been my Pavlovian trigger. "We need to talk" meant I had done something wrong. It meant someone was hurt or disappointed or in crisis, and it was my responsibility to fix it. It meant I was about to be handed another burden disguised as an opportunity to prove my love. But sitting in that living room, looking at my mother's performance of wounded concern, I felt something new. Clinical detachment. It was as if someone had handed me a pair of glasses that allowed me to see the manipulation tactics I'd been blind to my entire life. "The whole family is worried about you," she began, settling back onto my couch as if she owned it. "This isn't like you, Mija. Running away without a word, abandoning your responsibilities. Dr. Martinez at church thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown." There it was, the opening move. Frame my healthy boundary setting as mental illness, make me question my own sanity rather than their behavior. "Maria is beside herself," my mother continued. "Those poor children asking where Tia Camila is, why she doesn't love them anymore. And your father, ay, mija, your father barely ate anything on Christmas. He kept saying, 'Where's my responsible daughter?' What did we do wrong?" Move 2. Deploy the extended guilt. Make me responsible not just for my own actions, but for everyone else's emotional responses to those actions. "I know we ask a lot of you sometimes," she said, reaching over to pat my hand with the patience of a saint. "But that's because we trust you. Because you're the strong one, the capable one. We depend on you because we believe in you." And there was move 3. Reframe exploitation as flattery. Make me feel special for being used. For 32 years, this routine had worked flawlessly. I would apologize, explain myself, promise to do better, and then prove my love by sacrificing even more of myself on the altar of family harmony. But this time, I just sat there and watched her performance with the same detached interest I might show a nature documentary about predatory behavior. When she finished her monologue and looked at me expectantly, I said the words that would change everything. "I'm moving to Denver." The mask slipped so fast I almost felt sorry for her. The wounded mother disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "You can't just run away from your responsibilities." "What about Maria? What about the children? What about me? I'm getting older, Camila. I'm going to need more help, not less." "You have another daughter," I said calmly. "Maybe it's time Maria learned how to be responsible for her own life and children. Maria has her own problems. She's dealing with a divorce. She's struggling financially." "Because she's never had to face the consequences of her choices," I interrupted. "Because there's always been someone else, me, to bail her out. But I'm done being Maria's safety net. I'm done being the family ATM. I'm done being everyone's solution to problems I didn't create." My mother stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "This isn't you talking," she said finally. "Someone has poisoned your mind against your family. That friend in Colorado, probably. Some bitter woman who doesn't understand family loyalty." And there it was, the nuclear option. When guilt and manipulation failed, blame outside influences. Suggests that my newfound clarity was actually foreign contamination of my naturally compliant nature. "No, Mom," I said, standing up to signal that this conversation was over. "This is me talking. For the first time in 32 years, this is actually me talking. And what I'm saying is that I love you all, but I'm done enabling you. I'm done being the family sacrifice. I'm done pretending that being used is the same thing as being loved. She left without another word, but I knew this was far from over. I had declared war on a system that had worked perfectly for everyone except me for over 3 decades. They weren't going to give up their most valuable resource without a fight. But I had something now that I'd never had before. The knowledge that there was another way to live. I'd seen it, tasted it, felt what it was like to be valued rather than used. And I was willing to fight for it. The real battle was just beginning. 2 weeks into January, just as I was finalizing my apartment lease in Denver and preparing to give notice at my current job, the call came. My father, using his careful, diplomatic voice, the one he reserved for diffusing explosive situations. Camilla, we think it would be good for everyone to sit down and talk this through like a family. Sunday dinner at your mother's house. Nothing dramatic, just a conversation. I should have known it was a trap. In my family, nothing dramatic was code for, we've planned something very dramatic, but we're going to frame it as perfectly reasonable. But a part of me, the part that had been trained since birth to hope for their approval, thought maybe this was it. Maybe my standing up for myself had finally gotten their attention. Maybe they were ready to have an honest conversation about how things needed to change. I was so naive. I arrived at my mother's house on Sunday to find not just my immediate family, but the entire extended clan. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even my 85-year-old grandmother. They were all seated around the dining room table like a tribunal, with the chair at the head left conspicuously empty. For me, the accused. My mother gestured toward the empty chair with the kind of grace usually reserved for offering a blindfold to a firing squad victim. Sit, Mia. We've all been very worried about you. Worried. The intervention began with my father, speaking in the careful, measured tones of someone reading from a script they'd rehearsed. Camilla, we love you very much, but your recent behavior has been concerning. Running away on Christmas, refusing to help your sister, talking about moving across the country. These aren't the actions of the daughter we raised. Then came my Aunt Carmen. Family is everything, mija. Everything else, jobs, friends, even romantic relationships, they come and go. But family is forever. You can't just abandon us because you're going through a difficult time. Uncle Roberto nodded sagely. Sometimes, we all have to make sacrifices for the good of the family. That's what being an adult means. One by one, they took their turns. Each speech was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, designed to make me feel selfish, unstable, and wrong. They painted a picture of a family in crisis because one member had suddenly become unreasonable and cruel. They spoke about duty and love and sacrifice as if these were things I'd never heard of, as if I hadn't been living these concepts every day for 32 years. But the pièce de résistance came from Maria herself. She had clearly been saving her strength for this moment, because she launched into a performance that would have made Sarah Bernhardt weep with envy. Tears flowed down her cheeks as she spoke about the devastating Christmas her children had experienced because their beloved aunt had abandoned them. She talked about how she'd had to explain to her 9-year-old why there were no presents under the tree, how she'd had to watch her 6-year-old cry because Tia Camila didn't love them anymore. I don't understand what I did wrong, she sobbed, looking around the table for support. I've always tried to be a good sister. Yes, maybe I've needed help sometimes, but that's what family is for, right? And now Camilla wants to punish my innocent children because she's decided she doesn't want to be part of this family anymore. The room erupted in murmurs of sympathy and support for poor Maria, the victim of her sister's inexplicable cruelty. I sat there listening to this character assassination, and I felt something I'd never felt before in a room full of my family members, complete and utter calm. Because for the first time in my life, I could see exactly what was happening. This wasn't a family meeting. This was a coordinated attack designed to shame me back into compliance, and it had failed spectacularly. When Maria finished her Oscar-worthy performance and the room fell silent, waiting for my inevitable breakdown and apology, I stood up. "Is anyone else going to speak?" I asked politely. "Or can I respond now?" My grandmother, who had been silent throughout the entire proceedings, looked up at me with eyes that were sharper than anyone had given her credit for. "I'd like to hear what Camilla has to say," she said quietly. I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA, who had raised me, who claimed to love me, and I realized that love, real love, doesn't require you to disappear. "You want to talk about family," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Let's talk about family. Let's talk about how for 32 years I have given everything I had to this family, my money, my time, my opportunities, my dreams. Let's talk about how I've been the family emergency fund, the family babysitter, the family problem solver, and the family scapegoat all rolled into one convenient package." I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I'd been keeping track. Let's talk numbers, since apparently that's the only language we all understand. In the past 5 years alone, I have given this family over $30,000. $30,000 of my hard-earned money that I will never see again. I have provided over 800 hours of free childcare. That's 20 full work weeks. I have missed job opportunities, social opportunities, and romantic opportunities because I was always on call for the next family emergency. The room was dead silent now. And you know what I got in return? I got to be the family joke. The spinster sister who has nothing better to do anyway. The walking ATM who owes you for the privilege of being exploited. The reliable workhorse who could be counted on to sacrifice herself on the altar of everyone else's convenience. Maria started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." "You want to talk about Christmas?" "Let's talk about Christmas. You didn't invite me to Christmas dinner. You assigned me to Christmas duty. You expected me to pay for a party I wasn't invited to enjoy, and then provide 12 hours of unpaid labor so the rest of you could relax. And when I finally said no, when I finally chose myself for once in my life, you called me selfish." I looked directly at Maria. "You want to know what's selfish?" "Selfish is having 3 children you can't afford and expecting someone else to pay for their needs. Selfish is going through 2 divorces because you never learned how to be a responsible partner and expecting someone else to bail you out financially every time. Selfish is calling your sister at midnight every time one of your kids has a nightmare because you never learned how to comfort your own children." Maria's face had gone from tragic to furious, but I wasn't done. "And you," I turned to my mother, "you want to talk about family loyalty. Where was your loyalty when you told Aunt Carmen that I owe you? Where was your loyalty when you planned my entire Christmas without asking me what I wanted? Where was your loyalty when you raised one daughter to give everything and the other daughter to take everything?" The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once, defending, explaining, justifying, but over the chaos, one voice cut through like a knife. "Enough!" Everyone turned to stare at my grandmother, who had struggled to her feet with more energy than anyone had seen from her in years. "Sit down, all of you," she commanded, and such was the force of her personality that everyone obeyed immediately. She looked around the table with the authority of a woman who had raised 6 children through the Depression and 2 wars. "I have been sitting here for an hour, listening to you people shame this girl for finally growing a backbone, and I am disgusted. Disgusted and ashamed." She turned to my mother. "Elena, you should be ashamed of yourself. You raised one daughter to be a doormat and the other to be a user, and now you want to blame Camila for finally refusing to play her assigned role? She turned to Maria. And you, Misha, you are 40 years old with 3 children. When exactly were you planning to start taking care of yourself? When Camila is 50, 60, when she's dead? The room was so quiet, you could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. I raised 6 children during the hardest times this country has ever seen, and never once did I expect one child to sacrifice their entire life for the convenience of the others. That's not family. That's slavery, with a pretty bow tied around it. She walked over to me, her steps slow but determined. Mija, she said, taking my hands in her weathered ones. You go to Denver. You build the life you want. And if any of these people try to make you feel guilty for choosing happiness over obligation, you tell them that your abuela said they can go to hell. The words hung in the air like a benediction. But the real vindication came 3 months later, in the most unexpected way possible. I had moved to Denver, taken the marketing job, and was slowly building a life that felt authentically mine for the first time ever. My family had tried the usual tactics: guilt trips, sob stories, and increasingly desperate attempts to manufacture emergencies that required my immediate attention and financial intervention. But for the first time in my life, I held firm. Then, on a quiet Thursday evening in April, I got a call from my college friend Jessica, who still lived in my hometown. Camila? She said, barely containing her excitement. You need to get on Facebook right now. Your story is everywhere. Confused, I logged into my barely used Facebook account and searched for my name. What I found made my heart stop. Someone, I later found out it was my cousin Sophia, who had been at that disastrous family meeting, had recorded my speech on her phone. But instead of using it to shame me, she had posted it with a caption that read, "This is what it looks like when a woman finally finds her voice. This is my cousin Camilla, and she is my hero." The video had been shared 50,000 times in 3 days. The comments section was a revelation. Thousands of women sharing their own stories of family exploitation, financial abuse, and the soul-crushing weight of being the responsible one in dysfunctional family systems. Women thanking me for putting words to experiences they'd never been able to articulate. Women saying my speech had given them the courage to set their own boundaries. But it was the responses from older women that hit me hardest. I'm 67 years old, and I just now realized I've been the family ATM my entire life. Thank you for helping me see that it's not too late to change. I've been supporting my adult children for 20 years while they live their dream lives. Your speech gave me permission to start living mine. My daughter treats me exactly like your family treated you. I'm sending her this video and telling her things are going to change. Within a week, the video had over 2 million views. News outlets picked it up. I was invited on podcasts and talk shows. A literary agent reached out about a book deal. But the most satisfying moment came when my mother called me, her voice tight with what I could only describe as panic. Camilla, this video, people are calling me. They're saying terrible things about our family. You have to make it stop. I didn't make the video, Mom, I said calmly. And I can't control how people respond to the truth. But it's making us look bad. Your Uncle Roberto said his neighbors are asking him about it. Maria's friends have seen it. Everyone is going to think we're terrible people. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old guilt. These were my family members, after all. Did I really want them to face public shame? But then I remembered all the years I'd absorbed their shame, their failures, their consequences. I remembered all the times they'd thrown me under the bus to protect their own reputations. I remembered Christmas morning, when they'd planned to exploit me one more time, and then blame me for ruining everything when I finally said no. "Mom," I said gently, "if you don't want people to think you're terrible, maybe you should stop doing terrible things. Maybe you should start treating your daughters like human beings instead of resources to be managed. Maybe you should apologize. Really apologize. Not the fake apology where you blame me for misunderstanding your intentions." Silence. "I have to go," she said finally. "But this isn't over, Camilla." "Yes," I said, "it is." And I hung up. 6 months later, I was living in a beautiful apartment in downtown Denver with a view of the mountains that took my breath away every morning. I had been promoted at work, had started dating a wonderful man named David who thought my ambition was attractive rather than threatening, and had built a chosen family of friends who valued my presence rather than my productivity. I still got the occasional guilt trip from my biological family, but they had largely given up. Maria had been forced to get a real job when her usual financial safety net disappeared. My mother had discovered that hiring actual babysitters cost money, and that other people's adult children weren't automatically available to solve her problems. The family dynamic had shifted in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Without me to enable everyone's dysfunction, they'd been forced to start solving their own problems. It wasn't always pretty, but it was necessary. But the most unexpected gift came in the form of my grandmother. 3 weeks after the viral video, she called me. "Mija," she said, "I've been thinking about what you said that day, and I owe you an apology. Abuela, you defended me. I defended you that day, yes, but I should have defended you years ago. I should have stopped this pattern when you were still a child. I knew what they were doing to you, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I was wrong." She paused, and I could hear her crying softly. "I'm 85 years old, and I've learned something important from my granddaughter. It's never too late to choose the right side." That Christmas, my grandmother came to visit me in Denver. We had a quiet celebration, just the two of us, cooking simple foods and sharing stories I'd never heard before about her own struggles with family expectations and gender roles. "You know," she said as we watched the snow fall outside my apartment window, "I always thought family meant accepting whatever treatment people gave you, just because you shared blood. But you taught me that real family, real love, means believing that the people you care about deserve to be happy." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then she asked the question I'd been waiting for someone to ask for 32 years. "What do you want, Mija?" Not what you think you should want, not what would make other people happy. What do you actually want for your life? I thought about it for a long moment, looking out at the mountains that had become my new horizon. "I want to build something," I said finally. "I want to use everything I learned from being the family problem solver to help other people solve their own problems. I want to write about this experience, maybe start a nonprofit for people recovering from family financial abuse. I want to get married someday and have kids who grow up knowing that love doesn't require sacrifice." She smiled. "Then that's what you should do." And so I am. I found it recently while going through old papers, a letter I'd written to my family right after I moved to Denver but never sent. Reading it now, I'm glad I kept my silence then. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to simply live your truth, rather than explaining it to people who are determined not to understand. But I want to share it here, because I think there are other Camillas out there who need to hear that their feelings are valid, their boundaries are necessary, and their dreams matter. To my family, you raised me to believe that love was measured by how much I could endure. You taught me that my value lay in my usefulness, and that asking for anything in return was selfish. You convinced me that my dreams were less important than everyone else's emergencies, and that my happiness was a luxury we couldn't afford. You were wrong. Love doesn't require martyrdom. Family doesn't mean sacrificing one person for the convenience of everyone else. And loyalty doesn't mean accepting abuse with a smile. I don't hate you. I don't even blame you, really. You were acting out patterns that were probably passed down through generations, repeating cycles that someone should have broken long ago. But just because something is generational doesn't mean it has to be permanent. I'm breaking the cycle. I'm choosing a different story for my life, one where I matter, where my dreams are valid, where love is reciprocal and respect is non-negotiable, where I get to be the protagonist of my own story instead of a supporting character in everyone else's. I hope someday you'll understand. I hope someday you'll look at the choices you made and the patterns you perpetuated and decide to do better. Not for me, it's too late for that, but for yourselves. Because the truth is, a family system that requires one person to be perpetually diminished in order to function isn't sustainable. Eventually, that person will choose themselves. Eventually, that person will walk away. And when they do, everyone loses. I didn't want it to end this way. But I also couldn't let it continue the way it was. I chose myself. And for the first time in my life, I'm not sorry. With love and boundaries, Camilla. If you've made it this far, if you've stayed with me through this entire story, then you probably see yourself somewhere in these words. Maybe you're the family ATM, the perpetual babysitter, the one who's always expected to sacrifice your dreams for everyone else's convenience. Maybe you've been told that setting boundaries is selfish, that choosing yourself is cruel, that love means enduring whatever treatment people decide to give you. Let me tell you something that no one told me for 32 years. You matter. Your dreams matter. Your happiness matters. And anyone who tries to convince you otherwise is not acting out of love. They're acting out of convenience. Real love doesn't require you to disappear. Real family doesn't keep score of who owes whom. Real relationships are built on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You don't have to accept crumbs and call it a feast. You don't have to shrink yourself to make other people comfortable. It's scary to change patterns that have been in place for years or even decades. It's terrifying to risk losing relationships, even toxic ones. But here's what I learned. When you stop accepting less than you deserve, you make room for people who will give you what you actually deserve. The family I was born into taught me that I was valuable only for what I could provide. The family I chose for myself loves me for who I am. That's the difference between obligation and love, between duty and joy, between surviving and thriving. You get to choose which family you want to be part of. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the family's designated savior or the expected sacrifice, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are millions of us out there, people who were raised to believe that our worth was tied to our usefulness, that love was something we had to earn through constant giving. But we're changing that narrative. We're breaking generational cycles. We're choosing ourselves and teaching the next generation that they deserve to be chosen too. Share this story if it spoke to you. Share your own story in the comments below if you feel safe doing so. Let's create a community of people who understand that boundaries aren't walls. They're gates that let the right people in. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about finding your voice, setting boundaries, and choosing yourself. Because the world needs more people who know their worth and aren't afraid to insist that others recognize it too. Remember, you don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your sacrifice. And you definitely don't owe anyone an apology for finally choosing happiness over obligation. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And your happiness? That matters most of all. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that every person deserves to be the protagonist of their own life story. Because when we choose ourselves, we give others permission to do the same. And that's how we change the world. One boundary one choice, one brave decision at a time.